Hello everyone, this is Mujahid from class 26. I'm going to talk about hooks today. Hooks are functions that let you use React features like state and lifecycle features in the functional components. Before 2018, for example, states were not able to use in the functional components, but in class components. But right now we can use them, and it's very efficient way to handle things in the React. To understand better states and also I'm going to talk about effect hook, state and effect hooks. State hook, I'm going to show you a counter with a button on the page. So every time every time you click button and you want to, the count will be counting the numbers from 0 to how many times you clicked. Let's have a look. First, let's try to do this with an ordinary variable without using state. So let's have a look to the code. On line 4, I'm declaring and assigning a first initial value of 0 to a count variable. Then I'm using that count variable in JSX code in order to show in the page, as you can see here, in the red bordered area. And I added an event listener, on-click event listener on the button, and a function to handle that event, which is incrementing the count variable by 1 each time you click, and also logging a no state count with a counting value. So it seems legit. Let's try to see it if it works. I'm clicking the button. I see the value from the log inside the event handler function. It's updated, but interestingly, on the page on JSX code, it's not updated to the latest value of the count variable because React cannot preserve a latest value of a variable if it's changed in a function without using a state. So this is an ordinary variable which is incremented by 1 each time you click within the function. So it's not updating this value with the latest value of the count variable, because after this function exits, then the value of the count variable kind of disappears for the function, the main function. So it's not changing here. It's also always showing the very first initial value. But how come it's showing correctly here? Because it gets from inside the function, which is not disappeared yet for the JSX code. Okay, so on here you can see it's not working like we want. But if you use state variable, so instead of plain variable, I have used state variable here. To use state variable, you need to import it from the React, like here, use state, and then you declare it by using this method. You use array destruction, const your state variable, and the second argument will be the function that lets you to update the value of the state variable. Then it's equal to useState, and this is the value you would want to pass for making the very first initial value of your state variable. So the only thing we changed here, we used state variable, not using ordinary variable, but state variable. So you pass again in the JSX code your count variable, which is state variable right now. And also you have a button with an event listener on click, and you pass a function, an event handler function. But in here, you update the value, you increment the value of the count variable with a slightly different way, because you have a function to edit it, to update the value of the state variable, setCount. So you use it, setCount and count plus 1. So it's going to set the count variable, which you declared here, with one incremented value, and it's going to work. Why? Because you use state variable, then React will preserve the latest value of the count variable, which will be one incremented value after you click one time. Then let's have a look. So I put that in the red, green bordered div, and state count will be verb. Let's have a look. Let's clear this part, and then see, it's incremented by 1 after clicked one time. Again, 2 times click, number is 2. One more, 3. Because every time you click, it remembers the previous value, the latest value, because it's preserved by React because you used useState. So this is not an ordinary variable, it's a state variable from now on, so you can use it freely to have latest value which is preserved by React. There's also another hook, effect hook. I'm going to talk about it. It's a hook that you would want to use when you want to have effect on DOM, when you want to have data fetching from an API, so on. So these are side effects, kinda. They are even happening after the DOM rendered, so you can continue using them. To use useEffect, again, you import it from the React, then you create your useEffect function. In the useEffect function, you pass a function. I'm using here an arrow function. Then you do whatever change you would want on your state variable. For example, I am assigning document title to, I'm assigning count variable value to document title, so I can show here how many times I clicked the state variable button. So I'm assigning count variable value to document title, but also I am getting that count variable from state variable count, which is incremented by 1 every time you click this button. So every time you click this button, useEffect function will be called, and then it's going to update the document title with the latest value of the count variable. So after every click, you see the document title has been changed again. See? 1, 2. But I want to show you something about useEffect. Let's refresh the page. You see, it's working. Coming from line 9. What is line 9? Coming from line 8. It's coming from line 8. What is this? It is coming from useEffect. So it means useEffect called even after very first render. So after very first render, it's going to be called. So if you leave useEffect like this, it's going to be called after every render, including very first one. But if you have a second parameter in useEffect, so the first one will be the function, then the second one will be dependencies. If you leave it empty like this, it's going to be called after every render, including the first one. But if you add an array, which is empty, it's going to be called only after very first render. So you see, it's called after first render, but if you click button, even though you see document title is still over there assigned with the count value, but it's not changing because your dependency array is empty. It's telling React only call this useEffect after very first render, which is not working after first renders. Even though we are rendering this component again and again after every time we click the button, it's not changing the document title value. So the last thing you can use about dependency part of useEffect, you can pass a variable here, which useEffect function will be depend on that variable. In this case, it's count variable. Let's save this. Then it's going to be called after very first render again, but now it's going to be called also after you have changed the count variable value. It's going to be called again and again. So every time you update the value of the count variable, which is state variable here, it's going to be called again. useEffect will be depend on the count variable. Every time you change, you update the value of the count, useEffect will be called. Let's see. So we expect after we change the count variable by clicking this button, then it's going to be updating the document title also. See, it works. Then it means the useEffect now is dependent on the count variable. So the last thing about useEffect, you would want to have a cleanup function which is returned by useEffect. So what is cleanup function? The cleanup function, normally you use it to clean the previous data values of the useEffect, which you don't want to be leaked if you unmounted the function, the component, sorry. So if you don't clean up, then it's going to be available, so the memory will be leaked. But if you want to, for example, subscribe something, then you would want to unsubscribe it with the cleanup function, because you don't want to, the subscribed value, the data, subscribed data will be open. So you pass here a cleanup function by adding return, a function that you want to do the cleanup job. Of course, this is not a cleanup job, but I just wanted to show you. So you can use a function to clean up after the useEffect. Then your memory will be not leaked, at least. Thanks for watching. Hope it was helpful.